Document. Part 1. The sun hung heavy in the sky, a relentless orb of fire that scorched the cracked earth below. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the horizon into a wavering mirage. It was a world without rain, without rivers, and seemingly without hope. For decades, the planet had been drying up, its once vast oceans shrinking into salty wastelands, and its lush forests turning to brittle skeletons of wood and ash. Humanity clung to survival by sheer willpower, scraping together whatever meager resources they could find. Jack Harper stood at the edge of what used to be a lake. All that remained now was a flat expanse of cracked mud, stretching as far as the eye could see. His boots crunched against the dry surface as he walked, each step stirring tiny clouds of dust into the air. He carried a battered toolbox in one hand and a canteen slung over his shoulder, half empty, but still precious. Beside him, keeping pace with quiet determination, was Lily Harper, his younger sister. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, but her green eyes shone with a stubborn light that refused to dim. "Do you think we'll find anything today?" Lily asked, breaking the oppressive silence. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though she feared the answer. Jack didn't reply immediately. Instead, he knelt down and ran his fingers over the parched ground. "Maybe," he said finally, his tone measured. "There's always a chance." Lily nodded, though neither of them believed it entirely. They had scoured this area before, searching for any sign of water or salvageable equipment. So far, their efforts had yielded little more than disappointment. But giving up wasn't an option. It's not when the alternative meant certain death. Their small community. Ragtag group of survivors huddled together in makeshift shelters on the outskirts of the old city depended on these scavenging trips. Every drop of water, every scrap of metal or wire mattered. Back home, people were rationing food and water to the point where even children went to bed hungry. The elders whispered about how things used to be, recounting tales of flowing rivers and endless skies filled with clouds. To Jack and Lily, those stories sounded like fairy tales, possible dreams from another time. As they moved further across the barren landscape, the ruins of civilization loomed ahead. Broken buildings jutted out of the ground like jagged teeth, their walls crumbling and windows shattered. Once, this place might have been bustling with life shops lining the streets, cars driving by, laughter echoing through the air. Now, it was a graveyard of forgotten memories. Overtaken by sand and decay, Jack paused beside an overturned truck, its rusted frame baking under the sun. He set the toolbox down and began rummaging through the wreckage. "Keep an eye out," he told Lily. "If you see anyone or anything, let me know." Lily nodded again and climbed onto a nearby pile of debris, scanning the horizon. She hated these moments most, the waiting, the uncertainty. Out here, danger lurked around every corner. Raiders prowled the wastes, preying on weaker groups for supplies. Wild animals, driven mad by hunger and thirst, roamed freely. And then there were the storms, sudden and violent, capable of burying entire towns beneath walls of sand. But today, the desert seemed eerily quiet. No wind stirred the air, no movement caught Lily's eye, just the endless stretch of emptiness, broken only by the skeletal remains of humanity's past. Inside the truck, Jack found nothing useful, just scraps of fabric and shards of glass. Frustrated, he slammed the toolbox shut and stood up. "Let's try the old power station," he said, pointing toward a cluster of concrete structures in the distance. There might still be something worth salvaging there. They trudged onward, their footsteps silent against the hard-packed earth. As they approached the power station, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of rust and decay. The building itself was a monolith of faded gray, its windows boarded up, and its doors hanging loosely on their hinges. Jack pushed one open and stepped inside, motioning for Lily to follow. The interior was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls as sunlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Dust coated every surface, muffling their movements as they explored room after room. Most of the equipment had been stripped long ago, leaving behind only empty shells of machinery. But in the corner of one particularly large chamber, Jack spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. It was a generator, or at least part of one. Its casing was dented and corroded, but it looked intact enough to repair. More importantly, tucked beneath it was a stack of yellowed papers. Jack knelt down and pulled them free, brushing away layers of grime to reveal faded diagrams and notes. But at the top of the first page, bold letters spelled out the words, "Atmospheric Water Extractor." "What is it?" Lily asked, peering over his shoulder. "I'm not sure yet," Jack admitted, flipping through the pages. The designs were complex, filled with technical jargon and calculations that made his head spin. But one thing was clear. This machine was supposed to extract water from steam in the air. If it worked, it could change everything. Lily's eyes widened. "You mean make water out of thin air? That's what it says?" Jack's voice was tinged with disbelief. He had heard rumors of such technology before, whispers of experiments conducted during the early days of the drought. Them had ever amounted to anything, until now, perhaps. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the discovery settled over them like a physical force. This wasn't just some random piece of junk. It was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in a world drowning in despair. "We should take it back," Lily said finally. "Show Emma." Emma Lewis was the closest thing their community had to a scientist. A biologist by training, she spent most of her time studying plants and soil samples, trying to coax life out of the barren earth. If anyone could make sense of these blueprints, it was her. Jack nodded. "Yeah, let's go." On the way back to camp, the siblings barely spoke. Their minds raced with possibilities, imagining what this invention could mean for their people. Could it really work? Or was it just another false promise, destined to lead to more heartbreak? When they arrived, the others greeted them with weary smiles. Daniel Hayes, a wiry man in his 40s with sharp features and quick reflexes, was unloading supplies from his cart. He had returned from one of his trading runs, bringing back a few cans of food and a couple of liters of water. It wasn't much, but it would help stretch their dwindling reserves a little longer. "It go?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the rolled-up papers in Jack's hand. "We found something," Jack replied. "Something big." Intrigued, Daniel followed them to Emma's tent. Inside, the young woman sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by pots of soil and trays of struggling seedlings. She looked up as they entered, her brow furrowing in curiosity. "What's this?" she asked, taking the blueprints from Jack. He explained what they had found, watching as her expression shifted from skepticism to fascination. By the time he finished, her eyes were shining with excitement. This could actually work," she murmured, tracing the lines of the diagram with her finger. "If we can build it, if we can get it running, but can we?" Jack pressed. "We don't exactly have the tools or materials lying around." Emma hesitated, her enthusiasm tempered by reality. "It won't be easy, but we have to try." And so, amidst the ruins of a dying world, a spark of hope ignited. It was fragile, uncertain, and fraught with challenges, but it was there. And for the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't doomed after all. Document Part 2. The next morning, the air was thick with anticipation. News of Jack's discovery had spread quickly through the small community, and by sunrise, a crowd had gathered outside Emma's tent. People pressed close, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and hope. They whispered among themselves, speculating about what this mysterious machine might do. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as another pipe dream in a world full of broken promises. Others clung to the idea that it might be their salvation. Jack stood beside Emma, holding the blueprints tightly in his hands. He could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him, but he tried to push it aside. This wasn't just about Hemet, it was about all of them. If they could make this work, it would change everything. But first, they needed to understand how it worked. Emma cleared her throat, drawing the group's attention. "Tss, listen up," she said, her voice steady, despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "This machine is called an atmospheric water extractor. Based on these designs, It pulls moisture from the air steam and turns it into drinkable water. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back shouted, "You mean we can make water out of thin air?" "In theory, yes," Emma replied, "but it's not going to be easy. We'll need specific materials, tools, and a lot of time to build it. Even then, there's no guarantee it will work." Her words dampened some of the excitement, but not all of it. Lily stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We have to try," she said firmly. "What other choice do we have?" The crowd fell silent. No one argued with her. They all knew the truth. Without water, they wouldn't last much longer. The wells were drying up faster than anyone had anticipated, and the traders who brought supplies were becoming fewer and farther between. Every day felt like a race against time, and this machine, this strange, complicated invention, might be their only chance. Daniel Hayes, leaning against a nearby post with his arms crossed, spoke up. "What do we need first?" Emma unfolded the blueprints and spread them out on a makeshift table. She pointed to various sections, explaining what each part did and what materials they would need to construct it. "The core of the machine is a condensation chamber," she said. "It needs to be airtight and made of durable metal. Then there's the cooling system, which requires copper tubing and refrigerant coils. And finally, we'll need a power source, something strong enough to keep the whole thing running." Jack nodded, already mentally cataloging the items they had scavenged over the years. "We've got some scrap metal in storage," he said. "And I think there are a few coils left from that old fridge we found last month. But the refrigerant, that's going to be tricky." "Ah!" "Tricky doesn't even begin to cover it," Daniel muttered under his breath, pushed off the post, and walked closer to the table, studying the designs. "Even if we manage to gather everything, putting this thing together is going to take weeks, maybe months. And during that time, we're still going to need water." Emma frowned. "I know. But if we don't start now, we'll never get anywhere." Lily chimed in, her tone hopeful. "Maybe we can divide the work. Some people focus on gathering materials, while others help with the construction. That way, we can move faster." It was a good idea, and Jack immediately agreed. "Let's split into teams," he suggested. "Daniel, you're the best at finding supplies. Can you lead a group to scout for what we need? Ben and I will stay here and start building the frame." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "All right, but don't expect miracles. Resources are scarce out there." "I know," Jack said. "Just do your best." With the plan set, the group dispersed, each person focused on their assigned task. Jack and Emma retreated to the workshop, a cramped space filled with tools and half-finished projects. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work, using the scrap metal to construct the basic frame of the extractor. It was slow, painstaking labor, but neither of them complained. They were driven by a shared determination, fueled by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Meanwhile, Daniel assembled his team and prepared for their journey. He chose 3 others to accompany him. Sarah Evans, a quiet but resourceful, a woman who had joined their community a few months ago. Marcus Riley, a burly man with a knack for heavy lifting. And Ben Carter, a wiry teenager eager to prove himself. Before leaving, Daniel addressed the group. "We're heading east," he said, pointing to a crude map drawn on a piece of paper. "There's an old industrial site about 20 miles from here. If we're lucky, we'll find some of the parts we need. But stay sharp. The roads aren't safe anymore." The team nodded, checking their weapons and supplies one last time. Before setting out, as they disappeared into the distance, Jack watched them go, feeling a pang of worry. He trusted Daniel, but the world beyond their camp was dangerous. Raiders, wild animals, and unpredictable weather were constant threats. Still, he reminded himself that they had no choice. If they wanted to survive, they had to take risks. Back at the workshop, progress was slow but steady. By the end of the day, Jack and Emma had completed the frame of the condensation chamber. It was rough and uneven, far from perfect, but it was a start. Exhausted, they sat down to rest, sipping from their canteens and discussing the challenges ahead. "This isn't going to be easy," Emma admitted, rubbing her temples. Even if we finish building it, there's no guarantee it will work. Hey, these blueprints are old. They might not account for changes in the atmosphere since the drought began. I know, Jack replied, but we have to try. If we don't, we're just waiting to die. Emma sighed, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. Do you think it's possible? Really possible? Jack didn't answer right away. He thought about the cracked earth, the empty wells, the desperate faces of their friends and neighbors. He thought about Lily, who had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. And he thought about the blueprints, fragile and faded. But brimming with potential. I don't know, he said finally. But I believe in us. That's enough for now. As night fell, the community settled into an uneasy calm. Fires crackled in the center of camp, casting flickering shadows across the makeshift shelters. Conversations buzzed quietly, punctuated by bursts of laughter or the occasional argument. Despite the uncertainty, there was a sense of purpose in the air, a feeling that they were working toward something greater than themselves. In the darkness, Jack lay awake, staring at the stars. They seemed impossibly distant, cold pinpricks of light scattered across an endless void. He wondered if anyone else was out there, looking at the same sky, and wondering if they would survive another day. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream not of the past, but of the future. A future where rivers flowed again, where children played in the rain, where life flourished instead of fading. But dreams were fragile things, easily shattered by reality. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. And yet, as Jack closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of something extraordinary. The days that followed were grueling. Daniel and his team faced countless hardships on their journey. The road was littered with abandoned vehicles and crumbling buildings, each one a potential treasure trove or a trap. On the second day, they stumbled upon a derelict warehouse, its doors hanging open like a gaping mouth. Inside, they found shelves lined with rusted tools and dusty crates. Most of the contents were useless, but buried beneath a pile of debris. Marcus discovered a box of copper tubing. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sarah, meanwhile, kept watch outside, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She scanned the horizon constantly, alert for any sign of danger. Her instincts proved invaluable when a pack of feral dogs appeared on the outskirts of the warehouse, their bared teeth glinting in the sunlight. Quickly and quietly, she took aim and fired, scattering the animals before they could attack. By the time they reached the industrial site, the team was exhausted but triumphant. They had managed to salvage several key components, including a partially intact compressor and a bundle of wiring. Wasn't everything they needed, but it was enough to make the trip worthwhile. Back at the camp, Jack and Emma worked tirelessly on the extractor. With each passing day, the machine began to take shape, its form growing more defined and functional. The condensation chamber was complete, and they had started assembling the cooling system. Progress was slow, but every step forward filled. Then, with renewed determination, Lily visited the workshop often, bringing food and water and offering encouragement. She marveled at the complexity of the machine, watching as Jack and Emma pieced it together like a giant puzzle. "Do you think it will really work?" she asked one afternoon, her voice tinged with awe. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "We're going to find out." And so, amidst the ruins of a dying world, hope continued to burn brightly. It was a fragile flame, threatened by doubt and danger at every turn, but it was there, stubborn and unyielding, refusing to be extinguished. Document Part 3. The days blurred together as Jack and Emma poured their energy into building the atmospheric water extractor. The workshop became their second home, a place where time seemed to lose meaning. Outside, the relentless sun beat down on the cracked earth, but inside the dimly lit space, they focused on the task at hand. Each piece of metal, each coil of wire, and each bolt was handled with care, as though it held the key to their survival. Lily often joined them, sitting quietly in a corner while sharpening tools or organizing spare parts. But her presence was comforting. Sometimes she hummed softly under her breath, a tune from before the drought that neither Jack nor Emma could quite place. It reminded them of a world they barely remembered, a world where music played over speakers, where laughter filled parks, where water flowed freely from taps. Despite their progress, challenges loomed large. The cooling system was proving especially difficult to assemble. The copper tubing they had salvaged was bent and corroded in places, requiring hours of painstaking work to reshape and clean. Emma knelt on the ground, her hands blackened with grease, as she carefully soldered the connections. Her brow furrowed in concentration, sweat dripping down her face. "This part needs to be perfect," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "If there's even a tiny leak, the whole thing could fail." Jack nodded, handing her another section of tubing. "Take your time. We can't afford mistakes." He glanced out the window, scanning the horizon for any sign of Daniel's team. They had been gone for nearly a week now, and worry gnawed at him like a persistent ache. What if something had happened to them? What if they never returned? He tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on tightening bolts and testing seals. But no matter how hard he worked, the unease lingered. On the 5th day, just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a cloud of dust appeared. In the distance, Jack dropped his wrench and rushed outside, squinting against the glare. As the figures came closer, he recognized Daniel leading the group. Relief washed over him like a wave, but it was short-lived. Their faces were grim, and the cart they pulled behind them was lighter than expected. Daniel climbed down from the cart and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "We ran into trouble," he said flatly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Raiders ambushed us near the industrial site. We lost most of what we found." Jack's heart sank. "How bad is it?" "Enough." Daniel sighed and motioned for Marcus and Sarah to unload the cart. There were only a few items: a small compressor, some rubber hoses, and a handful of screws. Not nearly enough to finish the extractor. Emma arrived a moment later, her expression falling as she took in the meager haul. "This isn't going to cut it," she said bluntly. "Without a proper power source, this machine won't run. And without refrigerant, the cooling system is useless." The weight of her words hung in the air, pressing down on everyone. For a brief moment, silence reigned. Then Lily spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "So we find another way," she said. "There has to be something else we can use." Her optimism sparked a flicker of determination in Jack. She was right, they couldn't give up now. "What?" "About solar panels?" he suggested. "We've got a couple lying around from old generators. Maybe we can rig them up to provide power." Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. "It might work. But it'll take time. Solar energy isn't consistent. Especially here. If we want steady output, we'll need batteries to store the charge." "Then we'll build them," Jack said firmly. "We'll scavenge whatever we need." Daniel shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "You're talking about weeks of work, maybe months. We don't have that kind of time. People are already rationing water down to sips. At this rate, we won't last until next month." "We don't have a choice," Jack shot back, his voice rising. "If we stop now, we're dead anyway. Are you willing to let everyone give up because it's hard?" The two men locked eyes, tension crackling between them. Finally, Daniel looked away, exhaling sharply. "Fine, do what you have to do. Don't expect me to sit around waiting for miracles." With that, he turned and walked off, leaving the others standing in awkward silence. Jack clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. He knew Daniel was scared. Everyone was, but fear wasn't an excuse for giving up. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder, pulling him back to the present. "Let's focus on what we can control," she said gently. "One step at a time." Over the next few days, the community rallied together in ways they hadn't before. Under Jack's direction, teams fanned out across the surrounding area, searching for anything useful. Some ventured into abandoned buildings, prying open rusted doors and climbing through broken windows. Others dug through piles of rubble, uncovering buried treasures like scraps of wiring and fragments of glass. Even the children pitched in, collecting empty cans and bottles that might serve as makeshift containers. Back at the workshop, Jack and Emma worked late into the night, piecing together. The solar panel array? It was a patchwork of mismatched parts, held together by duct tape and sheer willpower. Every connection sparked hope. Every successful test brought them closer to their goal. Slowly but surely, the extractor began to take shape. Lily stayed by their side throughout, keeping them fed and hydrated. She brewed weak tea using dried herbs and shared stories to keep their spirits up. One evening, as they sat around a flickering lantern, she recounted a tale her grandmother used to tell about a great flood that once swept across the land. People thought it would destroy everything, she said, her voice warm despite the chill in the air. But after the waters receded, new life sprang up everywhere. Trees grew taller, rivers ran clear. It was like the earth had been reborn. Jack smiled faintly. Maybe we're living through the opposite story, he said, a flood of dryness instead of water. But who says we can't turn it around? Emma nodded, her eyes reflecting the light of the lantern. Stories always start with hardship. The real question is how they end. As the hours ticked by, the extractor grew more complete. The condensation chamber gleamed dully in the lamplight, its seams sealed tight. The cooling system snaked around it like a coiled snake, ready to spring into action. The solar panels stood propped against the wall, their surfaces catching the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the cracks in the roof. But there was still one major hurdle: the refrigerant. Without it, the cooling system wouldn't function properly. Emma spent hours poring over the blueprints, trying to devise a workaround. Finally, she hit upon an idea. What if we use compressed air? She suggested during a rare break. If we can pressurize it enough, it might act as a substitute for a refrigerant. It's risky, Jack replied, but it's worth a shot. They scavenged an old air compressor from the storage shed and modified it to fit the extractor. It wasn't ideal, but it was all they had. As they attached the final pieces, a sense of anticipation settled over the workshop. This was it, the moment of truth. By dawn, the machine was ready. Exhausted but exhilarated, Jack and Emma wheeled it outside and set it up in the center of the camp. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire community had gathered around, their faces a mix of hope and skepticism. Children clung to their parents' legs, wide-eyed and curious. Elders leaned on walking sticks, their expressions unreadable. Jack stepped forward, addressing the crowd. We don't know if this will work, he admitted, but we've done everything we can. Now it's up to the machine and to us. With trembling hands, he flipped the switch. A low hum filled the air as the solar panels began to draw power. Compressor whirred to life, sending bursts of compressed air coursing through the cooling system. Everyone held their breath, watching. As droplets of condensation formed along the edges of the condensation chamber, for several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Doubt crept into the crowd, whispers of disappointment spreading like wildfire. Then, suddenly, a single drop of water trickled into the collection tank below. Gasps rippled through the group as more drops followed, forming a steady stream. It's working, Lily cried, tears streaming down her face. Cheers erupted, echoing across the barren landscape. People hugged each other, laughing and crying in equal measure. The first time in years, there was real hope, not just a fleeting dream, but tangible proof that things could change. Jack stood back, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, they'd created something miraculous. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would still be long and fraught with challenges, yet for now, in this moment, they allowed themselves to celebrate as the sun rose higher in the sky. Casting golden light over the cracked earth, the community came together to share their newfound treasure. Cups were passed around, each person taking a cautious sip of the clear, cool water. It tasted sweet, like life itself. And so, amidst the ruins of a dying world, humanity took its first step toward renewal, not with grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but with a simple machine that pulled water from steam. It was imperfect, fragile, and far from perfect, but it was enough. enough to remind them that even in the darkest times, hope could bloom again. Document. Part 4. The celebration was short-lived. While the atmospheric water extractor had worked producing a steady trickle of water, it wasn't nearly enough to meet the needs of the entire community. The small collection tank filled, slowly, drop by drop, and when it was finally full, it held only a few liters. For a group of people who were rationing every sip, it was a cruel reminder of how far they still had to go. Jack stood beside the machine, his hands on his hips, staring at the meager amount of water with a mixture of frustration and despair. He had hoped for more, for something that could sustain them, not just tease them with possibilities. Around him, the mood shifted from jubilation to somber realization. The cheers faded, replaced by murmurs of doubt. It's not enough. Someone muttered in the crowd, their voice carrying just loud enough for everyone to hear. All that work, and we barely got a drink. Others nodded in agreement, their faces falling as the weight of the situation settled over them. Emma stepped forward, her expression calm but firm. "It's a start," she said, raising her voice, so everyone could hear. "This is proof that the concept works, and we need to improve it. But how?" asked Ben Carter, the wiry teenager who had gone scavenging with Daniel. His arms were crossed, and his brow furrowed with skepticism. "We don't have the parts or the time to make it better." "What if this is all we'll ever get?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Jack for support. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his dusty hair. "We can't give up now," he said. "If we stop trying, then yeah, this might be all we'll ever have. But if we keep pushing, if we keep working together, we can make it better. Have to." His words didn't erase the doubts, but they quieted them at least for a moment. The truth was, no one had a clear solution. The extractor was functional, but its output was pitifully low. Even doubling or tripling its efficiency wouldn't be enough to save them unless they found a way to scale it up significantly. Daniel approached, his face unreadable. He had been unusually quiet since returning from the scavenging trip, and Jack suspected it was because he felt responsible for losing most of the supplies. "What's next?" Daniel asked, his tone neutral but tinged with weariness. "We need to figure out why it's so slow," Jack replied. "Is it the cooling system? The compressor? Or maybe the solar panels aren't providing enough power?" Emma knelt beside the machine, inspecting it closely. She tapped the condensation chamber. Thoughtfully, "The design itself might be the problem," she said. "These blueprints are old. They weren't made for an environment like ours. The air here is drier than it used to be, which means there's less moisture to extract. We might need to redesign parts of it to compensate." "Redesign?" Lily repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "How are we supposed to do that? We're not engineers. We're just survivors." Emma gave her a small, encouraging smile. "We're smart, though, and we've got each other. If we work together, we can figure it out." Jack nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. They had come this far. They couldn't quit now. "Let's break it down," he said. "We'll divide into teams again. One group focuses on improving the cooling system, another looks at the power source, and a third tries to optimize the condensation chamber. Everyone has a role to play." The crowd murmured in agreement, though some still looked uncertain. Slowly, people began to disperse, heading off to their assigned tasks. Jack and Emma stayed behind, examining the machine in detail. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they pored over the blueprints, brainstorming ideas and jotting down notes. Later that afternoon, Sarah Evans joined them in the workshop. She had been quiet since returning from the scavenging trip, keeping mostly to herself. But now, she seemed eager to contribute. "I've been thinking," she said, pulling up a stool. "What if we use multiple machines instead of trying to fix this one?" Jack frowned, considering the idea. "You mean build duplicates?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied. "Think smaller. Instead of one big extractor, we could create several smaller ones. They'd be easier to build and maintain. And they could run simultaneously. That way, even if each one produces only a little water, combined, they'd give us more." Emma's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," she said. "Smaller units would also be portable, so we could move them around depending on where the Air is moistest. Jack nodded, already imagining the possibilities. It's risky, we'd need twice the materials and twice the effort, but it could work. Let's try it. Over the next few days, the community threw themselves into the new plan. Teams worked tirelessly, constructing smaller versions of the extractor based on modified designs. The process was chaotic, with people rushing back and forth between workshops, sharing tools and supplies. Tensions ran high, especially when resources became scarce. Arguments broke out, tempers flared, but somehow they kept moving forward. Lily played a crucial role in keeping morale up. She organized food and water deliveries to the workers, ensuring no one went hungry or dehydrated. At night, she gathered the children around the fire, telling stories about rivers and rainbows to distract them from the harsh realities of their world. Her optimism was contagious, spreading through the camp like a gentle breeze. Meanwhile, Jack and Emma focused on refining the design of the smaller extractors. Each unit was simpler than the original, with fewer moving parts and a streamlined cooling system. They tested prototypes repeatedly, tweaking them until they produced slightly more water than before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 1. Evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon. Painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Jack sat alone outside the workshop. He stared at the line of prototype extractors lined up in the dirt, their fans whirring softly in the cool night air. Despite the improvements, they still weren't producing enough water to sustain the community long term. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than ever. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," a voice said behind him. He turned to see Sarah standing there, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him and sat down beside him. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip. The warmth spread through him, easing some of the tension in his muscles. "I know it's hard," Sarah continued after a moment, "but you're doing everything you can. No one expects miracles from you." Jack sighed, leaning back on his elbows. "Just wish I knew if we're making the right choices. What if we're wasting our time? What if this isn't going to be enough?" Sarah shrugged. "We won't know unless we try. And honestly, what other choice do we have? Sitting around waiting for things to get better hasn't worked so far." Her words struck a chord with him. She was right, they had no guarantees, but they also had nothing to lose. Giving up wasn't an option. Not yet. The following morning, the community gathered once more to test the new batch of extractors. There were 5 units in total, each slightly different from the others. Jack and Emma explained the changes they had made, emphasizing that this was still experimental. When they activated the machines, the hum of fans filled the air, louder this time due to the increased number of units. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, droplets began forming in the collection tanks. It wasn't much, just a trickle. At first, but as the minutes passed, the flow grew steadier. By the end of an hour, each tank contained several liters of water. The crowd erupted into cheers, louder and more genuine than before. This time, the results were undeniable. The output per unit was still modest. The combined total was enough to make a real difference. For the first time in months, people drank their fill without worrying about rationing. Daniel approached Jack, his usual scowl replaced by a rare smile. "Looks like you pulled it off," he said gruffly. "Good job." Jack grinned. Relief washing over him. "We did it together," he corrected. Every single person here played a part. As the day wore on, the community celebrated with renewed hope. Fires burned brightly, casting flickering shadows across the makeshift shelters. Music drifted through the air, played on makeshift instruments crafted from scraps of metal and wood. Children danced barefoot in the dirt, their laughter ringing out like bells. But amidst the joy, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was fragile. Yes, they had succeeded in building functioning extractors, but the challenges ahead were daunting. Scaling up production would require more materials, more manpower, and more innovation. And beyond their immediate needs lay larger questions. Could this technology be shared with other communities? Would it truly be enough to reverse the damage done to the planet? For now, though, he allowed himself to bask in the moment. Tomorrow would bring its own struggles, its own uncertainties. But tonight, under the star-filled sky, they had earned the right to celebrate. Together, they had taken a step towards survival and, perhaps someday, renewal. And so, amidst the cracked earth and endless desert, humanity clung to hope not because it was easy, but because it was all they had left. Document Part 5. The success of the smaller extractors brought a renewed sense of purpose to the community. But it also brought new challenges. The machines were working slowly but surely, producing water, but they required constant maintenance. Fans clogged with dust, seals cracked under the strain of constant use, and the solar panels struggled to keep up with the growing demand for power. Every day felt like a race against time, as Jack and his team worked tirelessly to keep the system running. Lily noticed the toll it was taking on her brother. His hands were calloused from handling tools, his face gaunt from lack of sleep. She tried to convince him to take breaks, but he refused, insisting that there was too much to do. "If I stop even for a moment, everything could fall apart," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "We can't afford to slow down." Emma shared his determination, spending hours in the workshop tweaking designs and testing improvements. Her focus was unwavering, but she knew they couldn't rely solely on scavenged parts forever. Sooner or later, they would run out of materials. Without a steady supply, their efforts would grind to a halt. "We need to find a better way," Emma said during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions. "These machines are fragile. If we want them to last, we need stronger components parts that won't break down every few days." Jack nodded, rubbing his temples. "I know, but where do we even start? Everything useful has already been stripped from the ruins. We've scoured this area dozens of times." "There might still be something out there," Emma replied. "Somewhere farther away, maybe. Place no one's touched yet." Her suggestion sparked an idea in Jack's mind. He remembered hearing rumors about a hidden stash of pre-collapse technology, a cache of tools, electronics, and spare parts buried deep beneath the desert sands. It was a long shot, but if such a thing existed, it could be exactly what they needed. "I think I know where to look," he said, pulling out a worn map. "There's an old government facility about 50 miles east of here. People say it was abandoned decades ago, but some believe it still holds supplies." Emma studied the map, her brow furrowing. "That's risky. It's far from safe territory. And raiders patrol those roads. It's our best chance," Jack insisted. "If we stay here, we'll eventually run out of options. At least this gives us a goal." The next morning, Jack assembled a small team to accompany him on the journey. Daniel volunteered immediately, despite his earlier skepticism. "Someone's got to watch your back," he said with a smirk. "Besides, I'm not letting you hog all the glory." Sarah Evans joined as well, her quiet confidence making her an ideal companion for such a dangerous mission. Rounding out the group was Marcus Riley, whose strength would come in handy if they encountered trouble. Together they loaded a cart with supplies and set off before dawn. Leaving the others behind to maintain the extractors, the road ahead was treacherous, littered with obstacles at every turn. The first few miles passed uneventfully, but as they ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory, the landscape grew harsher. Sandstorms whipped across the horizon, forcing them to take shelter beneath tattered tarps. Abandoned vehicles blocked their path, requiring detours that added hours to their journey. And always there was the looming threat of raiders. On the third day, they spotted signs of human activity, tire tracks leading toward a cluster of crumbling buildings. Jack signaled for the group to stop, holding up a hand to silence them. "Stay low," he whispered. "Let's check it out." They crept forward cautiously, weapons drawn. Inside the buildings, they found evidence of recent occupation: empty food cans, discarded clothing, and makeshift barricades. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. "Raiders," Daniel muttered, kicking aside a rusted knife. "And they're close." Jack nodded grimly. They couldn't afford to linger. Moving quickly, they gathered what little they could carry. A coil of wire, a few bolts, and hurried back to the cart. As they prepared to leave, Sarah froze, pointing toward the horizon. A cloud of dust was rising in the distance, heading straight for them. "They're coming," she said sharply. "Jax, Heart raced. "Get moving!" Climbed onto the cart and urged the horses forward, racing across the barren terrain. Behind them, the roar of engines grew louder as the raiders closed in. Gunshots rang out, bullets whizzing past their heads. Low, gripping the reins tightly as Daniel returned fire, his aim steady despite the chaos. "Faster!" Marcus shouted, urging the horses to greater speed. For several tense minutes, they sped through the desert, the raiders hot on their heels. Just when it seemed like escape was impossible, Sarah spotted a narrow canyon up ahead. "There," she yelled, pointing toward the rocky opening. Without hesitation, Jack steered the cart toward the canyon, guiding the horses between the towering cliffs. The tight passage slowed their pursuers, forcing them to abandon their vehicles and continue. On foot, by the time the raiders reached the mouth of the canyon, Jack and his team were already disappearing into the distance, breathing heavily. They finally stopped to rest in a secluded valley. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. None of them spoke. They simply sat in silence, listening to the sound of their own breathing. That was too close. Daniel said, eventually breaking the quiet. "We can't keep running like this." "Won't have to if we find what we're looking for," Jack replied, his voice firm despite the fatigue in his eyes. "Just a little farther." By the 5th day, they reached the outskirts of the old government facility. What remained of the structure was buried beneath layers of sand, its once imposing walls reduced to crumbling ruins. The entrance was partially blocked by debris, but Jack spotted a reinforced door half buried in the ground. "This is it," he said, climbing down from the cart. "Let's see if there's anything left inside," using crowbars and brute strength. They pried the door open, revealing a dark staircase leading downward. The air smelled stale and metallic, hinting at the secrets hidden within. One by one, they descended into the depths, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The interior was eerily intact, untouched by time or looters. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with crates and boxes covered in thick layers of dust. Jack opened one cautiously, revealing stacks of circuit boards, wiring, and other electronic components. Nearby, another crate contained industrial grade tubing and gaskets, exactly what they needed for the extractors. "It's real," Sarah breathed, her voice filled with awe. "All of it." For a moment, none of them moved. They simply stood there, taking in the sight of the treasure trove before them. This was more than they had dared to hope for, a lifeline that could sustain their community for months, maybe even years, but their joy was short-lived. As they began loading the cart, a voice echoed through the chamber. "Drop the supplies and step away." Jack froze, his blood running cold. Slowly, he turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. A man with sharp features and piercing eyes. Behind him, several armed individuals stepped into view, their weapons trained on the group. "Marcus Cole," Daniel growled, recognizing the leader of the raiders who had chased them earlier. "Should have known you'd sniff this place out." Cole smirked, stepping closer. "You've got guts, showing up here. It's too bad you won't live long enough to enjoy your spoils." Jack's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned with no clear way out. But surrender wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. Glancing at his companions, he saw determination mirrored in their eyes. Whatever happened next, they would face it. Together. "Let's make a deal," Jack said, raising his hand slowly. "We don't want trouble. Take half the supplies and let us go." Cole laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "You think I'm stupid? I'll take everything, and then I'll take your lives." Before anyone could react, Sarah lunged forward, grabbing a nearby wrench and hurling it at Cole. The metal tool struck him squarely in the forehead, stunning him momentarily. In that split second, chaos erupted. Gunshots filled the air as both sides exchanged fire, the confined space amplifying the noise. Jack dove for cover, dragging Marcus with him. "We need to get out of here," he shouted over the din. "No argument here," Marcus replied, firing blindly toward their attackers, working together. The group fought their way back to the staircase, retreating upward toward the surface. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, narrowly missing them as they scrambled for safety. When they finally burst into the sunlight, they didn't stop to catch their breath. They ran. hauling the cart behind them as fast as their legs could carry them. It wasn't until they were miles away, the sound of pursuit fading into the distance, that they allowed themselves to pause. Exhausted and battered, they collapsed onto the sand, chests heaving with exertion. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice trembling with relief. "We actually did it." Jack nodded, though his thoughts were already turning to the road ahead. They had secured the supplies they needed, but the cost had been high. The raiders now knew about the facility, and they wouldn't stop until they claimed it for themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Jack stared into the distance. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. For now, though, they had given their people a fighting chance, and that was enough. Document. Part 6. The journey back to the camp was tense and exhausting. Jack and his team pushed themselves harder than ever, knowing that time was not on their side. The raiders would regroup, and once they did, they would come for the community. Every mile they traveled felt like a race against an invisible clock, ticking down to disaster. Lily was the first to spot them as they approached the camp. She had been standing on the outskirts, keeping watch while others worked on maintaining the extractors. Her face lit up with relief when she saw the cart loaded with supplies, but her smile faded when she noticed the grim expressions on their faces. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to meet them. Jack climbed down from the cart, his body aching from days of stress and lack of sleep. "We got what we needed," he said, gesturing to the crates. "But Marcus Cole knows about the facility. He'll be coming." "Here?" Lily's eyes widened in alarm. "When?" Soon Daniel interjected, his voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time." The news spread quickly through the community, casting a shadow over the earlier triumph of the extractors. People gathered around, their faces etched with worry. Some clutched weapons, others held tools, unsure of what to do next. Fear hung heavy in the air, mingling with the dust kicked up by the wind. Emma stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We can't run," she said firmly. "If we leave, we lose everything: the extractors, our home, our chance at survival." "So what do we do?" someone asked. "Fight? We're outnumbered." "We stand our ground," Jack replied, his tone steady, despite the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "We've survived this long because we've worked together. If we prepare, if we fight smart, we can hold them off." Daniel nodded in agreement. "We fortify the camp. Set traps, block entrances, make it hard for them to get in," Sarah added. "And we use the terrain to our advantage. They'll expect us to be weak, unprepared. Let's prove them wrong." The group began organizing immediately, dividing tasks among themselves. Some focused on reinforcing the perimeter, stacking sandbags and salvaging metal sheets to create makeshift barriers. Others dug trenches and rigged tripwires, turning the open desert into a maze of hazards. Emma led a team in modifying the extractors, ensuring they were protected from damage during the inevitable attack. Lily played a crucial role in keeping morale high. She moved among the workers, offering encouragement and reminding them of what they were fighting for. "This isn't just about us," she told a group of teenagers helping to dig trenches. "It's about everyone who depends on these machines. We have to protect them." As night fell, the camp transformed into a fortress. Torches flickered along the barricades, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. The hum of the extractors provided a constant reminder of why they were doing this. For the first time in days, Jack allowed himself a brief moment of rest, sitting by the fire with Lily and Emma. "You think we can win?" Lily asked quietly, breaking the silence. Jack hesitated, staring into the flames. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know we can't give up. Not now." Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. "We've faced impossible odds before. This is no different." Before dawn, scouts reported movement on the horizon. A convoy of vehicles was approaching, kicking up clouds of dust. Jack climbed to the top of a barrier, binoculars in hand, and confirmed the worst. Marcus Cole and his men were closing in. "All hands on deck," Jack shouted, his voice carrying across the camp. "They're here." The raiders arrived under cover of darkness, their engines roaring like beasts. Spotlights swept across the camp, illuminating the defenses. Gunfire erupted almost instantly, shattering the quiet of the night. Bullets ricocheted off the sandbags, sending shards of rock flying in all directions. Inside the camp, chaos reigned. Women and children huddled in the safest areas, shielded by reinforced shelters. Men and older teens manned the barricades, firing back with whatever weapons they had scavenged. Jack coordinated the defense, shouting orders and moving between positions to ensure everyone stayed focused. Daniel took charge of a small team tasked with luring the raiders into the traps. Using flares and decoys, they drew groups of attackers into the trenches and tripwires. Explosions rocked the desert as hidden mines detonated, sending plumes of sand and debris into the air. Sarah patrolled the perimeter, her sharp eyes scanning for weaknesses. When she spotted a group of raiders attempting to breach a less guarded section, she sounded the alarm. Emma and several others rushed to reinforce the line, pushing the invaders back with a combination of brute force and clever tactics. Amidst the battle, Lily remained calm, tending to the wounded and distributing ammunition. Her presence was a steadying force, a reminder that even in the midst. Document. Part 7. The battle raged on, the night air filled with the sounds of gunfire, shouts, and explosions. The raiders were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless as they surged forward in waves. Jack moved between the barricades, his heart pounding with every step. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on keeping everyone alive. At one point, a group of raiders managed to breach the outer defenses, forcing their way into the camp. Jack grabbed a crowbar and joined the fight, swinging it with all his strength. Beside him, Daniel fired his rifle with precision, taking down attackers one by one. Together, they drove the invaders back, sealing the gap before more could follow. But the raiders weren't just attacking blindly, they were testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses. Marcus Cole, their leader, was cunning, and he knew how to exploit fear. From his position near the front lines, he shouted taunts, trying to break the spirit of the defenders. "You can't hold out forever," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Give up now, and I might let some of you live." Jack clenched his jaw, refusing to let the words get to him. He turned to Emma, who was crouched nearby, reloading her weapon. "We need to take him out," he said urgently. "If we can stop Cole, the rest will fall apart." Emma nodded, her expression grim. "I'll cover you." "Go," Jack signaled to Sarah and Marcus Riley, motioning for them to follow. The three of them slipped away from the main fight, circling around to flank the raiders. Using the shadows and the uneven terrain, they crept closer to where Cole stood, directing his men with cold efficiency. His confidence made him careless, and that was their chance. As they approached, Asara spotted a sniper perched on a nearby ridge, aiming directly at Jack. Without hesitation, she raised her own rifle and fired, hitting the sniper square in the chest. The man toppled backward, disappearing into the darkness. Jack gave her a quick nod of thanks before continuing onward. When they were close enough, Jack signaled for silence. They waited for the right moment, timing their attack carefully. As Cole turned to bark another order, Jack sprang forward, tackling him to the ground. The two men grappled fiercely, each struggling for dominance. Cole was strong, his movements fueled by rage. But Jack had desperation on his side, and Lily's face in his mind. "Get off me," Cole snarled, throwing a punch that caught Jack in the jaw. Pain exploded in his head, but he refused to let go. Summoning every ounce of strength, he slammed his elbow into Cole's ribs, hearing a satisfying crack. Cole gasped momentarily, stunned, and Jack seized the opportunity to pin him down. Before Cole could recover, Sarah and Marcus arrived, aiming their weapons at him. "Stay down," Sarah warned, her voice icy. "Or we'll make sure you regret it." Cole glared at them, hatred burning in his eyes, but he didn't move. Defeat radiated from him like heat, and for the first time, Jack saw fear flicker across his face. With Cole neutralized, the tide of the battle began to shift. Word spread quickly among the raiders that their leader had been captured, sowing confusion and panic. Without someone to direct them, their attacks became disorganized, and the defenders seized the advantage. Daniel led a countercharge, driving the remaining raiders back toward their vehicles by the time the sun began to rise. The raiders were retreating, their convoy speeding off into the distance. The camp was battered and bruised, but it still stood. Cheers erupted from the defenders, their voices hoarse but triumphant. For the first time in hours, the air felt lighter, the tension easing like a storm passing. Jack stood over Cole, who was now bound and sitting on the ground, glaring daggers at anyone who came near. "It's over," Jack said, his tone firm. "You lost." Cole spat at the ground, his pride wounded but unbroken. "This isn't finished," he growled. "You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable?" Jack didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention to the others, checking for injuries and assessing the damage. The barricades were damaged, several tents had been torn apart, and there were casualties both minor and serious. But despite everything, they had survived. Lily tended to the wounded alongside Emma, using whatever medical supplies they had salvaged over the years. She worked quickly, her hands steady, even as tears streamed down her face. Every injury reminded her of how close they had come to losing everything, but she didn't stop, not for a second. Emma approached Jack as he surveyed the scene. "What do we do with him?" she asked, nodding toward Cole. Jack hesitated. Executing a prisoner wasn't an option. It would make them no better than the raiders, but letting Cole go wasn't safe either. "Keep him here," he decided finally. "For now. If he causes trouble, we'll deal with it then." Emma nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "And what about the others? The ones who ran off?" "They'll be back," Daniel interjected, joining the conversation. "Men like Cole don't give up easily. We need to stay ready," Jack agreed. "We'll reinforce the defenses, double the patrols, and we'll start training more people to fight. This isn't the last time we'll see them." Over the next few days, the community worked tirelessly to repair the damage and prepare for future threats. The extractors were inspected and repaired, ensuring they continued producing water. New traps were set around the perimeter. Lookout posts were established on high ground to provide early warning of approaching enemies. Despite the lingering tension, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Children ventured outside, again playing games in the dirt while their parents rebuilt shelters. Meals were shared around communal fires, laughter mingling with the crackle of flames. The victory over the raiders had strengthened their resolve, reminding them of what they could achieve when they worked together. Lily found moments of peace in the chaos, sitting beside the extractors and watching them hum softly. "Die," she often thought. About the stories her grandmother used to tell, the ones about rivers flowing freely and rain soaking the earth. Those tales seemed impossibly distant now, but she clung to the hope that someday they might come true again. Jack spent much of his time strategizing, planning for the next attack. He knew Cole wouldn't stay away forever, and he wanted to be ready. But he also allowed himself brief moments of reflection, standing beneath the stars and marveling at how far they had come. Against all odds, they had built something extraordinary, a fragile beacon of hope in a world that had nearly given up. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma joined him outside. "You look tired," she said gently. "I am," Jack admitted, rubbing his temples. "But I can't stop." "Not yet. You don't have to carry everything alone," Emma reminded him. "We're all in this together, remember?" Jack smiled. "Faintly, I know. And I couldn't have done any of this without you or Lily or Daniel or everyone else. But sometimes, it feels like the weight of the world is on my shoulders." Emma placed a hand on his arm. "It's not just your burden to bear. Let us help you. That's what family does." Her words struck a chord with him. In the months since the drought worsened, these people had become more than just neighbors or allies. They had become family. They relied on each other, supported each other, and fought for each other. It was that bond, stronger than steel, that had carried them through the darkest times as the stars emerged overhead, twinkling like tiny sparks in the vast expanse of sky. Jack felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would still be difficult, fraught with challenges and dangers. But as long as they stood together, he believed they could overcome anything. And so, amidst the ruins of a broken world, humanity proved its resilience once again, not through brute force or grand gestures, but through unity, determination, and the unwavering belief that even in the bleakest moments, there was always a chance for renewal.